Now we're going to dive into some of those internal dimensions of diversity that are very um, prevalent in the news. People talk about them all the time. Um, Number one, race, ethnicity, and color. These things have a lot of overlap, obviously, but not entirely overlap, which is why they are separate categories in our employment law. To say that discrimination doesn't occur would be disingenuous at best and an outright lie at worst. Discrimination is still prevalent. People still treat others differently because of skin color, because of ethnicity or accents or perceived race, real or perceived race. And so when we hear people tell us I was treated differently because I was Black, we have to listen to that story. We can't dismiss it out of hand because, again, that's a minimizing difference perspective when it comes to the continuum, right? We want to be able to recognize that there are differences in the way that people are treated and because of race, ethnicity, and skin color. We will talk about the implicit association tests a little bit more when we talk about unconscious bias in a few minutes. But you can go to Project Implicit, which is implicit.harvard.edu, and you can take some tests that look at the unconscious bias that we may have towards certain groups, race, ethnic, color, what have you. And specifically, you should know how that Project Implicit basically works. It's looking at your response time and subtle differences in your response time based on the cues that they give you in the test. And the interesting thing about this is the individual who designed the test had a bunch of grad students that was working with him at Harvard. And some of these grad students were required to take the test every day to log a diary of what they did and where they might have seen changes in some of their results. And this individual had taken the one based on race, Black versus white, basically, and was tracking their results on it. And every day, even though they would tell you, I would never purposely, intentionally discriminate against another group, blah, blah, blah. Every day they took the test, and the test results said that they were moderately biased against people who are Black, right? So moderately biased towards people who are white. And you might say, well, does it matter? Well, it probably, it certainly makes sense, because even if you wouldn't consciously engage in discrimination, there's this unconscious thing that happens underneath that we don't even realize we're doing. And we'll talk about this again in a little bit. And so what this individual did was every day took the test. It always came out the same, slightly biased against Black, until one day he woke up, he took the test, and it was boom, slightly biased towards white, towards Black. So, towards it. So he was more likely to be comfortable with Black versus white. Why did it change suddenly? What happened that created that blip, if you will, in the difference? And it turns out, as he looked at his diary, that he had been watching the Summer Olympics. And at a time when there were these amazing Black athletes, Carl Lewis, Florence Griffith Joyner, Jackie Joyner Kersee, who's one of our local favorites, right? She's big in the East St. Louis, in the St. Louis area. And I've been watching them being incredibly successful in the track and field events. And boom, we saw a change in perspective, a change in point of view, a change in the way that they thought about the unconscious bias that they had. What this means is, no, we don't have to all sit there and watch the Summer Olympics or the Winter Olympics and see people behaving to change our perspectives. But what it does tell us is it doesn't take a lot to start shifting our bias away from a more discriminatory or unconsciously discriminatory point of view towards a more conscious, intentional acceptance of differences, moving people along that continuum, if you will, that we talked about a few slides ago. And enabling us to recognize that what we need to do is reach out and interact with people who are different than us, to do the work and make the effort to learn and understand people who are different from us. This is where we go from the defensive to the minimizing difference, where we still don't understand others. We just assume everybody's the same and we ignore the differences. And then we move towards the acceptance stage, where we suddenly go, it's interesting to learn about that person. I want to learn more what it means to be transgender, or to grow up poor, or to live in the country, or to grow up black, to grow up, in Asia, whatever. Grew up in the military. I don't know what those things feel like, and I should learn what it feels like to be that person, to learn the empathy, to walk in their shoes and to see the world through their eyes. And that's what we learned from this work, right? Is that Project Implicit helps to helps to point out where we might have unconscious bias, where we don't even realize it, and it enables us to figure out how to, even with the simplest way, to start to incrementally overcome those unconscious biases by exposing ourselves to differences in a way that can be very positive. Obviously, stereotypes run rampant, particularly around issues of race and ethnicity and color. There's no surprise there. I mean, stereotypes exist everywhere, but they are very rampant when it comes to issues of race, ethnicity, and color. And I want to be clear, there's no such thing as a positive stereotype, because even positive stereotypes create problems for people. And I was doing some consulting work with a group once, and this individual, who was an Asian gentleman, said to me, "I'm a really bad Asian." I'm like, "Good grief, what do you mean by that?" And he said, "Well, because everybody assumes because I'm Asian that I'm going to be really good at math." And I will tell you, I have felt tremendous guilt my whole life about not living up to the expectations set for me that I'm supposed to be good at math. He goes, and it's really created a lot of problems for me growing up, A, in my family, B, in society. People going, "Oh, you failed the math test. Boy, you're a bad, whatever." I mean, they said to him, there were some horrible things that he shared in that moment. And he said, there are no such things as good stereotypes, because even what we think is a positive stereotype is actually still hurting people, because not everybody fits into the mold. A stereotype is the way that our brain simplifies the out group, whoever is, whatever or whomever is different from us. It's how we try to make sense of it, and then by putting a label on it, right, that everybody is or isn't, right, we are assuming that everybody in that group acts the same, behaves the same, thinks the same. If you've ever been in a marginalized group and someone says, "Well, what do lesbians think about this?" or "What do black people think about this?" They don't speak for everyone. There isn't a uniform way that everybody in that marginalized group thinks about things, sees things, experiences things, and chooses to think about those things. So stereotypes are really just a lazy way that we oversimplify a group, and we try to make sense of a group, and it's our brain's shortcut for trying to figure out and understand others, and when in fact, they do nothing but harm. But this is a natural thing our brain does. I want you to be really clear. Our brain is always trying to simplify and understand things. And because our brain is trying to simplify and understand things, it automatically engages in those stereotypes. But what's good about it is we're human beings with free will. We are human beings that have the cognitive capacity to look at that and go, "Oh, that's my brain trying to oversimplify things. And I know better that not all people behave in a certain way, not all people think in a certain way, not all people do things the same way. We're all different, even within similarity groups. Like when we look at the Hofstede's national cultures, right? Even within those countries, there is still a wide variety of behaviors. In our country, we have a lot of people who are very individualistic, but we also have people who are very collective focused, right? Some people are, in some cultures, they're masculine, but that doesn't mean everybody buys into the masculine ideal or the need for achievement ideal. Some people don't have the same pressure and the need to achieve. Even within common groups, there's so much variance within them that we need to be aware of that. And that's the foundation of why stereotypes exist. It's because we're trying to understand everybody, and we can't put all people in a box. And once we recognize that, it makes it a lot easier for us to not engage in stereotypes. You've heard me mention glass ceiling initiatives, and I've talked about this a couple of times, but I want to just reiterate, right, the importance of us recognizing when it comes to the glass ceiling, this is, or glass escalator, or whatever you call them. There's all sorts of different, similar, names for this. But basically, it's a barrier where somebody can see people moving up ahead of them, but they have a barrier that seems to be unspoken. And it's called a glass barrier because I feel like I should be able to get up there, but I keep on hitting this thing that stops me from advancing as high as I would like to go, and trying to understand what that is and why. So the glass ceiling is basically people seeing people progressing and then not understanding why they can't move past it. And often it happens to women and minorities. And George H.W. Bush, the very first President George Bush, he commissioned the Glass Ceiling Commission to investigate this. This was a Republican president that cared about these issues. And investigated this. This is not just a right versus left, left versus right sort of thing. People cared about this and really wanted to understand why were people hitting these barriers. And so they did find out that certain industries were more prone to the glass ceiling than others, and some did better at it. And so those that did better at it, number one, if we go back to what I was saying before about some of the challenges to diversity programs, one of the most important lessons we took away from that is those companies that were better at doing this made sure they were opportunities for everybody, right? Everybody. And so when we create opportunities for everybody, that it's not just for white people or just for minority groups or just for men or just for women, that everybody has the same opportunities. And if someone needs help, they will get the help they need, period. We don't make assumptions that because you're white and male, you don't need help, but because you're black, you do, because privilege is very different and advantage is very different. So we need to talk about that, and we'll get into privilege and advantage in a little bit. But the glass ceiling can be broken if we make concerted efforts to ensure there's opportunities for everyone. That's the most important lesson to take away from that work that was done on the glass ceiling. And then there are, those affirmative action myths, right? That we are required to hire people who are unqualified in order to meet affirmative action quotas. And first of all, quotas are illegal. And affirmative action isn't about hiring anybody. Affirmative action is about creating opportunity, making sure everybody has access to training, making sure everybody has access to opportunities, promotional opportunities, that we are reaching out and we are preparing a workforce so that everybody can compete on the same playing field. That's what, affirmative action is getting at. Like if we see a school that needs support, we put money into that school to make sure that it has support so kids can learn, right? All of those things. The standard, as I said, is good faith effort. We have to make a good faith effort to prepare and attract people to come and apply for us. And then we hire the best person, whatever it is, whomever that is. Other issues that you should be aware of, that each ethnic group faces their own sort of unique levels of types of discrimination, if you will. For example, driving while black is considered a really big issue for people in the black community. I've not experienced it, but my ex-husband has. And he's told me stories about being pulled over, doing the speed limit, not doing anything wrong in the slow lane, and still being pulled over because he looked like somebody that might have maybe sort of kind of committed a crime in the general area. Why? Because he was a black man driving a Saab. And that at the time was considered a very, high level type of car. Saabs don't exist anymore, but at the time, 20 odd years ago, they were considered a very, elite car that only people with money would drive. It's considered a sort of a special car, like a BMW. It's the same sort of level of car that it was. And sure enough, he got pulled over simply because he was a black man driving a nice car in an area that was pretty white. And we see this. Henry Louis Gates, a number of years ago, 20 odd years ago, experienced the same sort of thing, where he had lost his keys and he was trying to get into his house, and he got arrested for breaking and entering in his own house because they didn't believe him. They didn't look at his ID. They didn't ask him what's going on, what's happening, how can I help you? They assumed guilt immediately. And this is the challenge, right? How people get perceived because of the color of their skin. If a white person was doing that, the probability of them being arrested for breaking and entering into their own home would have been smaller, because there's a presumption of, well, let me see if I can find your ID, and let's investigate this. Let's make sure that it's not breaking and entering, blah, 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 blah. They will act first. They will think first before they act. Whereas oftentimes with Black people, they act first before they think, for whatever unconscious bias reasons that exist there. Other things we should be aware of in organizations is many like to celebrate sort of, group history months: Black history, white history, not white history, but Black history, women's history, Latino history, Native American history, LGBT history, et cetera, et cetera. All these different groups have these history months about helping us to just celebrate different cultures and understand different cultures. Why isn't there White History Month, or why isn't there White Pride, or Straight Pride? Well, because, right, in terms of history, people know their ethnic backgrounds. Like, I know, right? I can trace my ethnic background to know that I am Polish, Italian, and a few other minor groups, but those are the two major ones that I am. And I can trace it right back to my family. So I have Italian pride and Polish pride and, and all those sorts of things, because that's my heritage. That's where I come from. The reason why there's Black Pride, why there's Black History Month, is because literally we have removed an entire culture of people from their heritage. They don't know where they're from, because we brought slaves over here and they were enmeshed and intermingled, and they were bought and sold with no consideration for their history, their culture, their background, where they grew up. We removed that culture from them. And so Black History Month is about understanding Black experiences and the variety of experiences that Black people have that we don't understand, because we didn't experience that. Why is there not a straight pride? Well, because LGBT pride came out of fighting against levels of discrimination. So pride celebrations come from this idea that even if you don't like me, I'm still proud of who I am. It's not about being proud of how I have sex or how a person has sex, but about pride in knowing that no matter who I am, I'm still a good person, that no matter who I decide to be in a relationship with, it has no bearing on who I am and the value of who I am as an individual. And there's a whole host of other reasons which we could get into, but not the purpose of this. But the whole point of this, why we don't have a straight pride, or why we don't have, White History Month. Well, white history is pretty much the predominant history that we're taught in all of our schools. And so that's where, it's important for us to learn and spread our wings and understand different groups in ways that we never would have understood before. I had no idea, right, that there was a Black Wall Street in Oklahoma. I had no idea. I only learned about that probably in the last 10 years. And I'm a pretty smart person, and I've studied and I've learned in school, and I have a PhD and all that kind of stuff. Never learned that there was a Black Wall Street that got destroyed in Oklahoma. In Tulsa, I believe, is where it was. So there's a lot of little things in history that we never get taught, right? How many of you knew about Juneteenth before the last few years? It became a national holiday, right? Where we celebrate Juneteenth. Did anybody know what Juneteenth meant before this? I was fortunate enough that I knew, because my ex-husband told me. Married to a Black man, it's something I'm going to learn. But it doesn't mean that other people got taught that, and we certainly didn't get taught that in school.